Life was supposed to be simple, uncomplicated. That's what I thought, at least. My name is Sarah, and I'm 26 years old. I've been married to James for 3 years now. We met through mutual friends, and from the very first moment, there was this connection, a spark that made everything feel right. We clicked in ways I never thought possible. He was kind, intelligent, and so patient with me. Our love felt easy. I was happy. At least, that's what I thought at the time. We had our apartment, a small but cozy space in the city. Nothing too extravagant, but it felt like home. We would spend weekends together, sometimes cooking breakfast, other times going on long walks around the park. We didn't need much to enjoy each other's company. Our life felt calm, like a slow-moving river that only occasionally had ripples. The big things, the challenges, hadn't really come yet, or so I thought. Life, in our little bubble, was smooth. Then there was my mom. She had always been a big part of my life, and I was never the type of person to hide things from her. She had always been so supportive of me, sometimes too supportive, perhaps. Her advice was constant, and she often had strong opinions about everything, from my career choices to my relationships. I know she loved me, but sometimes it felt like she loved me in a way that was a little too heavy, like she wanted me to live up to expectations that weren't necessarily mine to meet. She always thought I deserved better. When I first introduced James to her, she liked him, but she still had that nagging feeling in the back of her mind. I could see it in her eyes when she spoke to me after we were together for a while. "He's a good guy, Sarah, but are you sure he's the one? You deserve someone who can give you more, someone who's more ambitious, more successful." It was subtle, but I could always feel the weight of her words. But James and we worked. I didn't need to hear her constant suggestions to know what was best for me. James wasn't perfect, but neither was I. We had our flaws, but we made things work. We were building a life together, and I was proud of what we had. I had my job, which I loved, and he had his. We were making it. No, we weren't rich, but we had everything we needed. Then, there was the day of my mom's birthday dinner. It was one of those gatherings where everyone was expected to attend, even if it meant having small talk with distant relatives. James and I were there, sitting around the dinner table with my mom, my dad, and a few aunts and uncles. The conversation flowed easily, the laughter was genuine, and everything seemed perfect. I could feel the warmth of the evening, everything seemed right. But that night, something shifted in the air. It was subtle at first, just a small comment that stuck with me, and then everything spiraled from there. My mom, always the one to put her opinions out there, made a remark about my marriage that lingered in the air. "You know, Sarah," she said casually between bites, "I think you could do better. I know James is a good guy, but maybe you should look for someone who can give you more. You deserve it." I could feel James stiffen beside me. He wasn't one to react overtly to these kinds of comments, but his body language was hard to miss. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and I could tell that the words stung. I didn't know how to react, so I laughed it off. I mean, it was my mom, right? She always said things like that, and I didn't think it was anything serious. But I could feel the tension growing. It was then that I made a mistake. I turned to James, and trying to lighten the mood, I joked, "Well, my mom thinks I could do better, you know?" I was laughing, but I could see his face change. His smile faltered, and there was a moment of silence. The air thickened, and for the first time in months, I noticed something in James's eyes that I hadn't seen before: hurt. "I didn't mean it like that," I said quickly, trying to recover, but the damage was already done. James didn't respond. He didn't say a word. He just stared down at his plate, poking at his food, not engaging with anyone. The rest of the dinner felt awkward. My mom was oblivious, continuing to chat with my dad, but I could feel this quiet storm brewing inside James. He wasn't angry, he was disappointed. He was hurt in a way that I couldn't understand at that moment, and I couldn't figure out why it was such a big deal. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. James wasn't the same. I tried to talk to him on the way home, but he wasn't responsive. "It's fine," he said, over and over again, but the way his voice sounded, it didn't feel fine. I didn't understand. How could something so small, so insignificant, cause this much tension? How could I have known that my attempt to lighten the mood with a silly joke would start the unraveling of everything we had built? The days after that dinner were uncomfortable, to say the least. I could feel a shift in James, though he didn't outright confront me. It was more like a slow, insidious change, one that crept up on me when I least expected it. He wasn't the same person I had married, at least, not the version I had known so well. The easygoing, affectionate James had retreated, and in his place was someone who seemed distant, almost as if he were a stranger. It wasn't just one thing, it was the little moments. The way he wouldn't meet my eyes when I spoke to him. The silence that filled the room during dinner, where we used to share jokes and laugh together. He would nod along to my stories, but there was no enthusiasm behind his responses. I could feel a wall between us that hadn't been there before. And no matter how hard I tried to break it down, the wall only seemed to grow taller. I tried talking to him, but whenever I brought up the topic, his response was always the same: "It's fine." That's what he said every time. "It's fine, Sarah. I'm just tired." But I knew it wasn't just tiredness. There was something more, something unspoken hanging in the air like a thick fog that neither of us could navigate. One evening, after a long day at work, I decided to press him again. I found him sitting on the couch, staring at his phone, scrolling through something with an expression I couldn't place. He didn't look up when I sat next to him. "James, what's going on? I can feel it. You're shutting me out, and I don't know why," I said softly, trying not to sound too desperate. "Is it because of what I said at my mom's dinner? I didn't mean to hurt you." He paused for a moment, then sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. Finally, he looked at me, but it wasn't the same look he used to give me. There was no warmth in his gaze, no affection. Just a quiet resignation. "It's not just that, Sarah," he said quietly, his voice almost distant. "It's everything. The way you always listen to your mom. The way her opinions mean more than mine. I've tried to ignore it, but it's been eating at me. I feel like I'm not enough for you. Like I'm just someone you settle for." I froze, stunned by his words. This was the first time he had ever said anything like that. I thought I had been doing everything right, trying to balance my relationship with him and my family. But now, I was realizing how much I had failed to understand. I had let my mother's opinions subtly influence my life and, by extension, my marriage. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my heart sinking. "I didn't know you felt that way. I never meant for you to feel like that. You're more than enough for me, James. I love you." He shook his head, though, like my words didn't quite reach him. "It's not just about love, Sarah. It's about respect. And I don't feel respected anymore. I've been trying to be patient, but I don't know how much longer I can pretend everything's fine." And with that, the conversation ended. It wasn't an argument, but it was the beginning of something I couldn't repair with a few words. It was the moment when I realized that something had shifted between us, something deep that couldn't just be undone by an apology. I couldn't go back to the way things were. James wasn't just hurt, he was broken, and I had a part in that. Over the next few days, I could feel him pulling away even more. The affection, the closeness, the little things that had made our relationship special, they were all gone. In their place was a cold silence. I tried to make up for it in small ways, like bringing him his favorite dinner or offering to watch his favorite movie, but nothing seemed to work. No matter how hard I tried, he remained distant, lost in his own thoughts, his own pain. I realized that I had underestimated how deeply my words had cut him, and it was too late to take them back. The cracks had appeared, and no amount of apologies could fill them. It wasn't just the silence that was suffocating me, it was the growing tension, the weight of it hanging between us. Every time I tried to bridge the gap, It felt like I was pushing against a door that wouldn't open, no matter how hard I knocked. I kept replaying that moment at my mom's dinner in my head, wondering where I went wrong. Had I truly hurt him so deeply with just a comment? I never imagined that my words, meant to be light-hearted, would have such an impact. James didn't respond to any of my attempts to talk. I sent him texts during the day, asking if we could sit down and talk things through, but he either didn't reply or gave me short, unfeeling responses. It became clear to me that he was shutting down, and I didn't know how to stop it. I could see the way he looked at me, his eyes were distant, almost devoid of the warmth and love they once held. It felt like I was losing him, slowly, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. I remember one night, a week after the dinner, when I finally reached my breaking point. I had spent the entire day trying to make things right, trying to show him how much I cared, but nothing worked. He barely spoke to me. We had dinner in silence, and when I asked him how his day had been, he barely acknowledged me. I couldn't hold it in any longer. James, we need to talk. Please, tell me what's going on. I can't keep pretending like everything is fine when it's not. My voice wavered, but I was desperate. I had to fix this. I couldn't lose him. He looked at me, his face cold, eyes hollow. He set his fork down with deliberate slowness and stood up from the table, turning his back on me as he walked toward the living room. "I'm tired, Sarah," he muttered, his voice void of any emotion. "I'm tired of trying to make this work when you're always so focused on what your mom thinks. I'm tired of being second to her in your life." The words hit me harder than I could have imagined. It wasn't just about that one dinner, it was about everything. My mother's voice had become so present in our marriage, so loud, that I hadn't even noticed how much of it had seeped into the cracks of our relationship. The small comments, the suggestions, the constant comparisons, it all added up. "I don't know what you want from me, James," I said, tears welling up in my eyes. "I love you. I've always loved you. But I don't know how to make you see that when you won't even talk to me." He didn't turn around. His shoulders slumped slightly, but he didn't come to me. "I don't think you do," he replied quietly. "I think you love the idea of me, but you don't really see me anymore. And I can't keep pretending that everything's okay when it's not." In that moment, something inside me snapped. I had known we were drifting apart, but hearing him say it out loud, hearing him give voice to the fear that had been quietly gnawing at me for weeks, brought everything crashing down. I had never felt so helpless, so lost. "I don't know what to do," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I don't know how to fix this, James." He finally turned around, his face filled with a mixture of frustration and sadness. "I don't know if we can fix this anymore, Sarah. I don't know if I can keep living in the shadow of someone else's expectations." And with that, the door between us slammed shut for the first time. He walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, trembling, alone with the weight of my mistakes. The days after James walked away were the hardest of my life. The apartment that had once felt like home now felt like a hollow shell. Every corner, every space, echoed with the absence of the person I had thought I could never live without. I woke up every morning with a sinking feeling in my stomach, dreading another day of silence, another day of pretending everything was fine when my world was falling apart. I tried to focus on work, on anything that could keep my mind occupied, but it felt impossible. I couldn't shake the image of James, his back turned to me, the finality in his words echoing in my mind. It wasn't just the loss of him that hurt, it was the realization that I had been blind to the damage I had caused. My mom's influence, her words, had slowly taken root in my marriage without me even realizing it. I had taken him for granted, thinking he would always be there, always understand. But he didn't. The silence between us was unbearable. I would find myself texting him, hoping for a response, but all I got were empty, one-word answers. "Fine. Okay. Whatever." It wasn't the James the first knew, the man who would have stayed up late talking to me about our dreams, our plans. He had disappeared, leaving behind someone I didn't recognize. Someone I feared I had lost forever. It wasn't long before I realized that James had stopped coming home at all. His things were still in the apartment, his clothes in the closet, his shoes by the door, but he wasn't there. I would call him, send texts, and sometimes would leave voicemails begging for him to come back, to talk to me, to help me understand how everything had gone so wrong. But there was nothing. Just silence. I knew I couldn't keep waiting like this. I couldn't keep living in limbo, holding on to something that had slipped through my fingers. But I didn't know what to do, where to go from here. I couldn't even picture a life without him, even though I knew, deep down, that I had to let go. One night, after what felt like an eternity of waiting, I decided to confront the situation head-on. I drove to his parents' house, hoping to find him there. When I arrived, his mother opened the door, looking at me with a mixture of sympathy and sadness. "Sarah," she said softly, her voice gentle. "I'm so sorry. James isn't here right now. But you should know, he's been really hurt by all of this." Her words struck me harder than I expected. I had been so focused on my own pain that I hadn't even considered what he might be going through. I had been so consumed with my own guilt that I had neglected his feelings entirely. It hit me in that moment that I couldn't fix this by just apologizing. I needed to show him that I was willing to change, to put in the work, to rebuild what we had. "I need to talk to him," I said, my voice trembling. "Please, I just need to explain. I need him to know how sorry I am." James's mother nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. "I'll tell him you came by. But Sarah, don't just apologize. Show him. Show him you can do better. For both of you." Those words stayed with me long after I left. They weren't just words of comfort, they were a challenge. A challenge I had to face head-on if I wanted to save what was left of my marriage. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew I couldn't undo the past, but maybe, just maybe, I could change the future. As I drove back home, I realized that the only way forward was to stop looking backward. I had made mistakes, but I couldn't let them define me. I had to show James that I was capable of being the person he needed me to be. And if that meant fighting for him, for us, then that was exactly what I was going to do. It had been 2 weeks since I last saw James, and the weight of that time apart had begun to feel unbearable. I had spent every waking moment reflecting on my mistakes, trying to figure out how to fix things, how to make him see that I wasn't the same person I had been when I let my mother's voice drown out his. I was determined to prove to him that I was willing to change, that I was capable of being the partner he deserved. One evening, as I sat in our now empty apartment, staring at the walls that once held our life together, my phone buzzed. It was a text from James. My heart stopped as I read the words, "We need to talk. Can you meet me at the cafe we used to go to?" The world felt like it paused for a moment. It wasn't the grand, romantic gesture I had hoped for, but it was a sign. A crack in the wall that had built up between us. I didn't waste another second. I grabbed my coat and headed out, my hands shaking with nervous anticipation. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew this was my chance. When I arrived at the cafe, I spotted James immediately. He was sitting at a corner table, staring into his coffee, his face shadowed with uncertainty. For a moment, I just stood there, looking at him. He seemed so far away, like a stranger. The man I knew and loved was buried beneath layers of hurt and distance. But I couldn't let that stop me. I had to try. I walked over slowly and took a seat across from him. The silence between us was thick, uncomfortable. I could feel my heart racing in my chest, my throat tight with the words I had been rehearsing in my mind. But no matter how much I wanted to speak, I couldn't find the right words. I needed him to understand, but I also needed to listen. "I'm sorry, James," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry for everything. For letting my mom's opinions get in the way of us. I didn't realize how much I was pushing you away, how much I was hurting you." He looked at me, his eyes tired but not as distant as before. "I don't know if I can forgive you right now, Sarah," he said softly. But I'm not sure I can just walk away either. The honesty in his words cut through me. I hadn't expected him to forgive me so easily. I had prepared myself for rejection, for the possibility that he might never want to try again. But hearing him say that he wasn't ready to walk away gave me hope, even if it was just a small thread. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, I replied, my voice trembling with emotion. I need you to know that I love you. And I'm willing to work on this, on us. I know it won't be easy, but I'm ready to fight for us, James. If you'll let me. He took a deep breath, his gaze softening as he looked at me. I don't know where we go from here, Sarah. But maybe we can figure it out together. In that moment, I felt a weight lift from my chest. It wasn't a grand declaration of love or an immediate reconciliation, but it was the beginning of something new. A chance to rebuild not just our relationship, but ourselves as individuals. We were both broken in our own ways, but we still had the pieces of each other. And that was enough for me to believe that we could make it through. As we sat there, talking about everything and nothing at all, I realized something. Relationships aren't about never making mistakes or always having the perfect answer. They're about growth, about understanding, about showing up even when it feels impossible. And in that moment, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together.